Brethren, once again, a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks to all the new guys who have joined us recently. It's a pleasure to see you all on here today. As usual, I'm going to go through some housekeeping. The meeting is being recorded, as you've just heard, and will be posted onto our YouTube page. Therefore, those of you who do not wish to be seen, please do feel free to turn your videos off now. To avoid any disruptions during the talk, if you could also ensure that your microphones are kept on mute throughout. Thank you. There will be a Q&A session after the talk, and if you'd like to ask Mike a question, please do use the hand up icon, which can be found in the participants section or participants tab on Zoom, or by simply hovering over your image, clicking the three dots, and you'll see it will say hand up there. To give everyone a chance to ask their questions, if you could restrict it to one question per person, that'd be much appreciated. Brethren, it is now my pleasure to introduce to our next speaker, Worshipful Brother Michael Richard Neville, or Mike, as he is more affectionately known. Mike has been a Freemason since 1995. He was initiated into Frederick Lodge of Unity, number 452, and was subsequently passed and raised. Mike is a member of 12 different orders and is a Grand Officer in many of them. In his personal life, Mike, or should I say Lieutenant Colonel Neville, served in the Royal Military Police in BAOR, Hong Kong and Northern Ireland. He is a former Detective Chief Inspector and was head of Central Forensic Image Team at New Scotland Yard. Experts in catching criminals with images, CCTV, mobile phones, computers and social media. So brethren, if you do see your screens flicker or your microphones, you know why. Other interests, Mike loves music. He can play the flute and the guitar. You got them with you, Mike?
No, they're not in here actually. Upstairs.
And of course, brethren, as you know, Mike is also an author. He's written two books, one entitled Sacred Secrets, which we're going to learn a little bit more about today, and the second, Crime and the Craft. If you'd like to know more about the books or you want to get your hands on a copy, please do feel free to drop a line to Mike, if that's okay, Mike.
Of course.
And if you're lucky enough, he might sign one for you as well. So, brethren, without further ado, Worship Brother Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Now, somebody's going to have to help me here. So, share screen. I've got to do this. Okay, I'm going to find where I am. 2 seconds while I do that. Because it's all a bit. Let me get to the right point of it. Oh, no, don't want to do that. 2 seconds. Can we see that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to give you some background, brethren, on why this was written, that firstly, I was very mindful that the knowledge of the Bible, like I say, we've got some Jewish brethren on here, and they often know the Bible and very good too. But in this general population, particularly in England, the knowledge of the Bible that was 50 years ago, people had scripture lessons at school. I went to Sunday school and church, and we watched things like the Ten Commandments and Samson and Delilah on the films on the TV. That doesn't happen anymore. So younger brethren joining, when we mention people like King Solomon, they have absolutely no idea who these people are. That was one of the reasons. The second reason was when I learned the second degree tracing board, I found myself talking about places I didn't know where they were on the map. I talked about people I didn't know who they were, and I was using words I didn't understand. And Freemasonry, we give out prizes for being able to regurgitate the ritual all in the right order, but there's no prizes for understanding it. And I thought this helps to aid that along. And also I also got frustrated at the petty rules in Freemasonry, like the what tie you can wear. So I don't know how many brethren on here are unsure of the tie regulation. So are you all clear on what tie you could wear at a Masonic meeting? I imagine most of you are. But how many of you on here could honestly say, hand on heart, that if I was to ask now what two books of the Bible feature King Solomon's Temple, I don't think most would know. In my experience of going around lodges, it's probably as I say, if I went to a mainly Jewish lodge, people would generally know this. If I went to a lodge where people said they were mainly Church of England or Roman Catholic, they wouldn't know it. And that's where I came from on this. And it's generally, I tend to do, my talks are usually interactive, so forgive me, this Zoom, it's very difficult. And there's some noise on this, so forgive the noises. But this is what I'm going to talk about. So firstly, Genesis, first book of the Bible. Then Exodus and the battles to secure Israel. Then King Solomon's temple. Then what happened after the death of Solomon. And now, if you're not in the Holy Royal Arch, this is where the story sort of takes into that. And then I'll go to the New Testament. Some of the impact of that, and what I consider to be where I think some of the ritual was lifted from in the Bible. And I usually do a test, but I'm not going to do a test on here. We'll do that in Lodge another day. So, and I'll also include other orders. So if you are in chapter or any of these other degrees, you'll see that some of the stories are fit in. So let's look at the book of Genesis, and let's consider, you know, in my ritual, which is logic, we have the first good traceable is very long. It mentions actually Cain and Abel. So, but in general in Masonic ritual, who is the first biblical character in chronological order to appear? Well, let me give you a clue. He's one of the last people we meet, and it's in fact Tubalcain. So Tubalcain appears in chapter 4, verse 22 of Genesis. For those who've not done the third degree yet, he features in that. I'm not going to tell you where, but he does. And the Bible's quite shrewd, really. It tells the story in a simplistic way. We've got to imagine that these stories were oral stories, so people have no concept of long-term things. So what it says in the Bible is that Tubalcain invented metalwork, his brother invented farming, and his sister invented, the legend is his sister invented weaving. And so these are stories told. And if we go to the British Museum, there's an example there of the objects, these early metalwork that would have been cast. So Tubalcain is the first chronologically in the craft who appears in our ritual. But now let's consider one of the most important men ever, really, if you consider what he's achieved, because let's look at Abraham. He is the father of the three great religions, Judaism, Islam, and then, of course, in consequence, Christianity. So when all these lunatics are killing people saying, my God's better than yours, they are truly lunatics, because they're all worshipping the same one. And Freemasonry, of course, is a great thing in bringing those three great faiths together, and others as well. And let's look at Abraham. Well, Abraham was born in the city of Ur, which you can see there, which is in modern-day Iraq, and he was told by God to go to a place. So up he would have gone along the Fertile Crescent, down the coast to a place called Beersheba, and there he had, I don't know who's the oldest Freemason on here, but he was 99 years old and he had a child. So I don't know, looking at some of the faces on here, I don't think many of you could A, manage to have the child in the first place, and B, look after it. But he had a child. Now, another question I generally ask in the lodge, and many of you will think this is ridiculous, but I ask, how did God test Abraham's faith? And you'd be surprised how many people don't know that. But of course, God tested Abraham's faith by telling him to sacrifice his son Isaac, and he did this on Mount Moriah, on that very stone, allegedly, that we can see at the bottom of the screen, and I'll show you where that is if you don't know already later. But of course, it was a test. Now, this occurred on Mount Moriah. Now, so how important is Mount Moriah? Well, it's very important to Freemasons, because Mount Moriah is ultimately, of course, where Solomon built the first temple, and then Zerubbabel built the second. So every time we go to craft or chapter, we take part in a ceremony, we're acting out or playing a part that we're actually on Mount Moriah. Now, and just to give you, the Bible is written in a very, very with an agenda, really, which demonstrates that the Israelites are the goodies and everybody else is a baddie, who needs to be a baddie. And this is the Ammonites. Now, for those who are aware, you'll know that the Ammonites are mentioned in the second degree tracing board. And they're the sort of baddies of the Old Testament. So if you like Doctor Who, they're a bit like the Daleks, or if you like Sherlock Holmes, it's Moriarty. You know, they're always up to some skullduggery, the Ammonites, and they usually get beaten, but come back again. And the story of the Ammonites, it demonstrates how the Bible's written. So this is Lot, who you can see here. Lot was at he was at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot's daughters, who you can see there, they thought that the Sodom and Gomorrah was the end of the world, so they'd never have any children. So the Bible tells us they got their father drunk, and then they had sex with him. And the product of this incestuous relationship was Ben Ammon, or the father of the Ammonites. And so you can see the Bible saying, well, these people are incestuous scum, really, so we can wipe them out. And you might say, what's the relevance of these stories today? And if you look at, of course, what's the capital of Jordan? Amman. So you can see that these hatreds and stories, when people say, why can't the people in the Middle East get on? This is an example of how these stories, there's me in the Dead Sea, near where Sodom and Gomorrah was. But of course, Abraham has Isaac, and Isaac has two sons, which many of you know, as in fact Jacob and Esau. And Jacob, he changes his name. His name is changed, and his name is changed, of course, to Israel. So he becomes the father of the nation. And if we look in the center, for those who are not in the Royal Arch, that's a layout of there's Jacob's ladder. You can see on the first degree tracing board. But the layout you can see some staves there. The staves represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and of course, how are they connected to Jacob? Well, they are the 10 sons and 2 grandsons. Now, there is one son missing. The missing son with no tribe named after him is, of course, Joseph, him of the technical of drink coat. And of course, because he helped the Pharaoh, I mean, remember the story that Joseph helps the Pharaoh with maintain over the famine. And of course, he's respected, and all his family go to live in Egypt. And Jacob and Joseph die, and everybody dies in Egypt. And of course, I suppose at that time the Hebrews were respected. But 4 or 5 generations later, of course, we come to the time of Moses, for those old enough to remember, Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston. So let's look at this, and here we have Moses. So let's remember the story of Moses. So Moses, of course, the Israelites are very badly treated now by the Egyptians. They're used as slaves. They're made to make bricks without straw, etc., etc. And Moses is found in the river. His mother puts him in the river because they're going to kill all the babies. And he's found by a prince, an Egyptian princess, and he's brought up as a prince and critically a priest in Egypt. And it says in the New Testament, Stephen says in the New Testament, that Moses knew all the secrets of the Egyptians. So the idea that religion just spring from nothing. So if we think before the Hebrews, before they went to Egypt, they had a single God. They had no name for that single God. They called him El Shaddai. They had no name, they had no rites and ceremonies, they had no religious articles. And now, when of course, after they leave, we've got things like the Ark of the Covenant, which if you look at the bottom, there is something, the middle image is from Tutankhamun's tomb, and on the bottom left is what the Ark of the Covenant they think looked like. So things are being copied. When we say things like, where were you first prepared to be made a Freemason? In my heart. That is nothing more than ancient Egyptian religion. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was the repository of truth and wisdom. And when they mummified you, they pulled out your brain and flung it in the bin, and they put your heart in a golden pot. So even if you go to chapter or you go to Church of England communion service, they say things like, cleanse the thoughts of our hearts. Why is it cleanse the thoughts of our heads? It's cleanse the thoughts of our hearts because we're harking back to ancient Egyptian religious beliefs, which came from Moses into Judaism, and then from Judaism into Christianity, and then Freemasonry. But Moses, of course, at 40, he had a midlife crisis. He realized he wasn't an Egyptian. He killed a slave driver who was beating up some Hebrew, and he fled into the wilderness. and he appeared before the burning bush. And if you look on the if you look at the top left picture, that's me in the monastery, St. Catherine's Monastery, and there's me holding the burning bush, allegedly, that St. Helena found. For those who've been there, you'll know that just by the side of it is a fire extinguisher. You know, it's health and safety. So I think if God appeared today, even he'd be put out. So health and safety rules all. But of course, Moses, he went up Mount Sinai to collect the Ten Commandments, and there, bottom right, there I am, fresh-faced, at the top of Mount Sinai. If you do go, if you've not been, you must copy Moses and not me, because he went on his own, and I went with a woman who moaned all the way up and all the way down. So there's a top tip. But moving on, so God used to give very specific orders in those days. And of course, the Israelites were led away by the pillar of fire and cloud, which you can see in the pictures, which are, of course, mentioned in the second degree tracing board and what the pillars of King Solomon are supposed to be based upon. But when the pillar stopped, the pillars could move for a day, or they could move for it's not move for a year. But when it stopped, they built an encampment. And if we look at the main picture, that's a copy of the original. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. That is, if you're in chapter the first, our Holy Lodge, and of course you'll know that was built by, if you delve into your memory, Aholiab and Bezaleel. And in that, there in the tent was 3 veils, and the Ark of the Covenant was kept at the back. There we are. So Moses, and of course they're just going to cross into the River Jordan, westbound, to take the Promised Land. And so, but Moses and his brother Aaron are dead, and so a new leader is selected. So who is that new leader? I will leave you to delve into your grey matter. Well, the new leader selected, of course, is Joshua, who's a very good soldier, but he's also an Ephraimite. We might remember from the second degree tracing board, it says the Ephraimites were clamorous and turbulent people, but they were Israelites. And I suppose I was a soldier, and I suppose the best way to equate it is it's those 5'6" jock guys who were the best soldiers ever, because it's stormed a machine gun nest, but they're always getting in trouble for being drunk when there was no war on, really. But so the Ephraimites were very good. Joshua was a very good soldier, and pictured is depends where you go. So in some lodges you'll get the sign, a second degree sign with the palm forward, and some with the palm to the side. The palm to the side usually refers to the picture on the right where the sun stands still, where it says Joshua prayed fervently to the Lord. On the left, in my lodge, the story is different. It's based on a battle where Moses was still alive, where he fought the Amalekites, and Moses' hands were held high. If they held his hands up, there you can see Ben-Hur, not Charlton Heston, an early chap, and his brother Aaron with his rod holding up Moses' hands, and as long as they held them up, the victory was assured. Okay. And now after the time of Joshua comes the time of the judges. Now, judges in the Bible are not many Whigs who don't know who the Beatles are or something like that. They're actually leaders. So they're really sort of appointed leaders, and not a king. They're appointed by God as a ruler, and there's some very famous ones, Barak, Samson, Deborah, a woman, but the one who features, again, something just to think about, who is the one who features in our ritual? Who's the judge? Well, I'll give you a clue. He's a quite good soldier, and of course that good soldier is Jephthah. So Jephthah's the one in the second degree tracing board who beats the Ammonites. He beats the Ephraimites, and then he beats the Ammonites, and he beats the Ephraimites. But poor old Jephthah, if you don't know, he made a terrible promise. He promised to God that if he allowed him to beat the Ammonites, he would sacrifice the first living thing that came to his door when he returned home, and it was his daughter. And there is a link to Tractor, because if you've been through the first principles chair, the word you're given, which is a form, it's a Hebrew word for a promise. It's a sort of oath. You can't get out of that obligation. That is what the word is that he used. That is the obligation. Therefore, he couldn't get out of it. And at the time of Jephthah this time, there lived a wealthy farmer who was married to Ruth. Now, you probably mentioned his name more than any other in Freemasonry, probably. And who is this wealthy farmer? Well, it's Boaz. He's not actually a prince and ruler. He's Boaz. That's who he is. And he's Ruth's. If you read the story of Ruth, it's a story of loyalty. And so we get now to the time of the kingdom. Now, I don't know about my Jewish friends on here, but a great Jewish friend of mine, Louis Keats, who helps me with Hebrew translations and the like, he always says 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and they're off complaining to God, saying we don't want a judge anymore. We want a king like everybody else, and so a king is appointed. Now let's consider this. Who in their mind knows? It's a shame we all have to be on mute because it's so hard. But who is the first king of Israel? Well, it's in fact Saul. And Saul is picked, but he does all sorts of crazy things. And so he doesn't do what Samuel, the last judge, is telling him to do, and he doesn't do what he goes against God's word. And so God says, "I've had enough of him." And he speaks to Samuel. And if you look in the black and white picture, Samuel's there holding a horn full of oil, and he's sent to the home of Jesse the Bethlehemite. And he's told by God that God will pick from one of Jesse's sons as to who will be anointed as the next king. Now, this story is told, if you go through the First Principles chair, but it's worth reading the Bible. It's a very good story about human judgment, because of course Jesse lines up his lads, and there's some very big, tall, strong boys there, good looking, and Samuel looks at the first one. He thinks, look at this tall lad here, good looking lad, and God says, I have refused him, because God sees not as man sees. He looketh on the heart, not the outward appearance. Now, being in the police, that's an important message, because you can't trust what people look like. You know, they might be telling the truth no matter if they're a different race, colour, creed, or they dress weirdly or whatever else. So it's a great lesson to learn in life. And so, of course, it gets to the end of the line. Also, what's going on? No more sons left. Oh, no, I've got one more. He's got a young boy in the field looking after the sheep, and of course that's David. And we can see David. He's anointed as the future king, and of course, but he's not. He's still not the king, because Saul's still on the throne, and the country at this point are invaded. So Israel's invaded at this point by the Philistines from the sea, and of course their champion is Goliath. And if you remember the story of David and Goliath, he goes to feed his brothers, take some food for his brothers, and every day this massive man who's 9 foot tall with a big spear and a big helmet comes out and basically says, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. And no one is. And the boy sees it and he says, well, I can kill a wolf or a bear if it attacks the sheep. And so he gets his little stones. But I say little stones. If you look at the stone, if you come with me to the British Museum, I can show you what they were flinging out of those slingshots. And they were like a cricket ball, and if that hit you across the head at the speed they could throw them, you would go down no matter how big you were. And so as he approaches, there's a link here. There's a link to the second degree obligation. So who can think of this? So the link is this, that as David approaches Samson, he's a young boy and he's got his little slingshot whizzing round. Samson said, if you don't clear off, I'll feed your carcass to the ravening birds of the air or the wild beasts of the field. So that's where that part of the second degree comes from. And that's why I put the former Archbishop of Canterbury there, because I've met him, and he's living proof that you can be so clever you are in fact daft, really. And he claimed, allegedly, and it's in my book, that our Masonic oaths are satanically inspired. But they're not satanically inspired, as I've just pointed out. They're straight lifts from the Bible. And so Saul eventually dies, and Saul dies in a very famous way, and it shows the impact of the Bible on our language today, because we still use this phrase, because Saul is fighting against the Philistines, and they're going to capture him, and he fell on his own sword. That's where that actual phrase comes from. So Saul is dead, David is made the king. He unites Israel and captures the capital. Okay, and if you look on the right-hand side, this is he annoys God because he counts the fighting men. Now, it's not clear in the Bible why God gets annoyed by this. Maybe it's a pride issue, but the God sends the angel of death, which eventually stops on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusites. So, and here we can see Araunah on the floor with the king, and that's where that's on Mount Moriah. That's where the temple was built. But how was Araunah a Jebusite? What's a Jebusite? Well, Jerusalem was called Jebus before it was captured. So Araunah must have been an original habitant of that before the Israelites. But if you read the story of King David, it's a bit like The Godfather, really. He bumps off all his sort of rivals. He does a despicable trick, really. One of his most faithful generals he's got an attractive wife, Beersheba, and so what he does, he puts his general in the worst parts of the battle so he can have him killed, basically, and nick his wife, which is a bit of a shabby old affair. So God said to him, you are not allowed to build the temple. That will come to your son. But so he gets old and he gets cold at night. Now, I don't know if I don't know how many of the brethren on here gets old and cold at night, and perhaps you have an electric blanket or the radiators on, but you should probably try the biblical method of keeping an elderly gentleman warm, which was to slip a young virgin into the bed with you. So this is the unfortunately named Abishag that they put in the bed with him. But poor old the king, he couldn't manage it. So if you there's no Viagra in those days. So the poor old king, that's the finish of him, and he's dead. And he's gone. And of course, who comes next? Well, after some political shenanigans and bumping off of rivals, Solomon becomes the king. You can see the dates of his reign. It's about 1,000 years before Christ. And what about the temple? Well, we don't really know what it looked like, in the sense that the Bible's description is quite vague. We know about the two pillars that are described in Freemasonry. There's a large bowl of water outside, the brazen sea, which you can see. They think that the top was in the Masonic ritual, it says there's globes and things. They think that what was the top was like a bowl called a galuth, where you put oil in it and you set fire to it, so it would be a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud in the day. But it's not like the second degree tracing board where people go into worship. That's just not right. It's not like a church. The people worship outside. The interior is for the Ark of the Covenant. If you look at the Ark of the Covenant there being taken in, what was inside it? Well, the tablets of stone, Aaron's rod, and a pot of manna. And where is it now? No one knows. According to Jewish legend, it's on Mount Nebo, where Moses died. In the New Testament, Revelation says it's in heaven, but is that set in the future, or is that quite now? Some people say it's in Ethiopia. We don't know. All I can recommend as a senior police officer is, if you do find it, don't touch it. Ring the authorities. Because the Philistines actually ran off with it at one point, and they kept it for 6 months, but then they returned it because God inflicted on them a dreadful punishment. And many of you on here may well have suffered this medical condition, because the Bible tells us that God gave the Philistines piles, but worse than that, that they had to make, the Philistines were told they had to make a gold copy of the piles. So somebody had to sit on the hot wax mold and make them. So if you've had piles, brethren, it could be worse. You could be that Philistine who had to sit on the hot wax mold. So don't touch it if you find it. I warn you off now. And what about the bronze? So it says in the ritual, and it says in the King James Bible that it was made of brass, but it's not. It's the Bronze Age. It's a mistranslation. Okay, you make things out of bronze, and where did it? So to make bronze, you need copper. Well, copper was locally sourced from Cyprus. Cyprus actually means the land of copper. So that was easily sourced by Hiram, the king of Tyre, because the Phoenicians were excellent traders and sailors. But what about the tin? Well, the tin, it could well have come from England, from Devon or Cornwall. You can see the map there of Devon and Cornwall. In one of the rivers there, they found tin ingots, which were been exported about 1,000 years before Solomon. So the Phoenicians would travel by boat, and you can see a representation which is in the Royal Exchange in London of the bottom left of Cornishmen trading with Phoenicians. And just to give you an example of this, that in Cornwall there's a place called Mosul, which is spelt Mosul, but it's pronounced Mosul. That's the same like Mosul in the Middle East. It means freshwater place. So it's probably named by Phoenicians who came to Cornwall 1,000 years before Christ to trade with the Phoenicians. So a part of King Solomon's temple could well have come from England. And again, what we say, though, second degree traceable, most of our people on here, I heard this 50 times, in the clay ground between Succoth and Zeredatha. And we say it, but where is it? Where is this place? Well, let me show you. So here's a map of, I always thank my grandmother because she bought me this Bible when I was 7 years old. And if we look at the map there, you can see at the top, you can see the Sea of Galilee, and then the River Jordan flows through the Sea of Galilee, completely southbound and into the Dead Sea. And we can see in the center of the map where it's pointed is the River Jabbok flowing in from the right side, and the Succoth and Zeredatha are in that confluence of the rivers there. Now, it's a good 40 miles to Jerusalem uphill. You can see a picture of what it looks like today down the bottom. And that's where these places are. But it must have been good. So when they said the pillars were cast hollow, they were probably cast as rings, rolled up the hill by the slaves or the people, the tribute, and then when they got to the top, they stacked them up like a child's stacking toy, and then polished them. That's why they formed hollow, not for any other reason, practical reason, but the practical reason being you could actually move them. And what's left of King Solomon's temple? Well, possibly this one pomegranate, and that's it, because the temple was utterly destroyed, as we can see. But moving on. So what happened when Solomon died? Well, Solomon was a roguish individual, like his father. He's having sex with all these women, including, unbelievably, Ammonites, which didn't curry favor with God at all. And so Solomon dies, and again, this is a tough question. Who takes over from Solomon? So let's have a look. It is in fact his son Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, he says to the Israelites, right, my father taxed you, I'm going to tax you more. It's a bit like politicians, really. I suppose they're competing who can tax them the most. And he sends an elderly tax collector. This elderly gentleman has worked for his grandfather David. He's worked for his father Solomon. He sends this elderly gentleman, and the people turn on him, and you can see what happens there. He's in the middle. They stone him to death. Now, who is this elderly gentleman? Well, I'll give you a clue. He is the last biblical character you meet in the craft. Delve into your mind. Who would be the last biblical character you meet? It's in fact Adoniram. And of course, Adoniram is important in Masonry, so being stoned to death is probably a good end for such a person. But the consequences of Rehoboam's greed is that 10 of the tribes break off and form the northern kingdom of Israel. They form the northern kingdom of Israel. It's in the dark green at the top. And 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, form the kingdom of Judah down the bottom. So at the moment, they are under threat. They split apart. And so you can see that the Philistines are on the coast. They're still fighting against them. You can see the Edomites, the Ammonites are there still. But worse than everything are the Assyrians, who you can see at the top. The Assyrians are like the SS of the Bible. They are absolutely brutal, wicked soldiers. They rule by violence and terror and torture. If you come with me to the British Museum, you can see them playing catch. There's friezes from the Assyrian capital where they're playing catch with severed heads. They don't mess around. They put people up on stakes, and they rule by fear, and they're pressing down onto the northern kingdom. and they eventually take the northern kingdom, despite all the prophets advising them against their wickedness, and they become the 10 lost tribes. In the future, they become the Samaritans, okay? And the people in Judah say, you're bastards, you're all mixed up, you've been assimilated into all these other empires. And that's where the idea of the Jews and Samaritans hating each other comes from. And that's why 500 years or so after, or more than after this, 600 years after this, that Jesus uses the Samaritan as a goodie, because he's, allegedly a hated individual. So the kingdom split apart, and now, having the northern kingdom having fallen to the Assyrians, we now having a new power emerging, which is Babylonia. Babylonia under Nebuchadnezzar. It only lasted as long, really, as the Soviet Union, about 70 years. But you can see the extent of the Babylonian Empire. And what happens is that if you remember from chapter now, so if you're not in chapter, this is why you should join, because this is where the story continues. If you remember the story, the Babylonians capture Jerusalem quite quickly. They take away the king Jehoiakim, and they install on the throne his son, his uncle Mattaniah. And they say to his uncle Mattaniah, you are now called Zedekiah, which means that the justice of Jehovah, because you work for us, and if you don't obey our rules of Babylon, you will get the justice of Jehovah. And they leave him in charge of Jerusalem. But as soon as they're gone, Zedekiah is a treacherous scoundrel, and he goes to Egypt and he tries to negotiate a deal with the pharaohs to push out the Babylonians. The Babylonians get wind of this, and they send a mighty army under a general Nebuzaradan. So if you're in the Royal and Select Masters, you'll know about Nebuzaradan. If you wonder why everybody's called Nebuzaradan, Nebuchadnezzar, Nebu was a god in Babylon. That's where it's a prefix for the names. So they send a mighty army, and this is fascinating. Because Judah's attacked, and that center piece, that piece of pottery, is actually living proof of this. This is a message which is now in the British Museum. In those days, paper was very rare, so they would write messages on bits of pottery. This is a message sent from one Israelite commander at the siege of Lachish, which is the second city of Judah, to another during the siege. And it says, basically, if you look at the pottery, you can see that the second line is it says, I hope our Lord Jehovah sends us peace. So if you're in chapter, it does put the whole story into some kind of cocked hat. But that is living proof that this happened in the British Museum of the siege. And eventually they capture Jerusalem. Zedekiah flees with his sons, but he's captured. And you can see in the picture in the left, there's General Nebuzaradan, the Babylonian. He makes Zedekiah, you can see he's been held up and watching. His arms are up in the air like this. He's been held up while all his sons are killed in front of him. And then they burn out his eyes. So it's the last thing he sees. They chain up Zedekiah and they drag him off in chains to Babylon. And then they smash down the temple and set fire to it. And this is where Jeremiah recalls that when the pillars fall down, he records that they were a hand's breadth in thickness. We don't learn that when they're built. We learn that when they're smashed down. And they steal all the treasures from the temple. The Ark of the Covenant vanishes, but all the holy vessels that are cast in the clay ground of Zuccoth and Zeradatha are now lost. The temple is the great conflagration that we read about in chapter, and the Jewish people are dragged away. A few are left behind to do menial work, but the rest are taken away to be assimilated into the Babylonian Empire. This is a standard feature of ancient times, who would take people away so they would hopefully forget who they were and start using the language of the empire and the weights and measures. But the Jewish people are far stronger than that. And this is an important time. So if you are, this is when the Jewish people became Jewish. If you're a Christian as well, this is when the scriptures, or a Muslim, this is when the scriptures that we use started to be written down. People like Daniel, the prophet Daniel was there. And this is a time of this is Ezekiel. Ezekiel fascinating character. We're going to have a drink at some time. We'll have a pint of whatever he used to have, because he used to have weird visions. He had a vision of, if you read Ezekiel, the first chapter, he sees what amounts to a spaceship landing. A spaceship comes down to earth. It's got 4 wheels which rotate, and in the wheels there are the faces of an angel, or the 4 faces of an angel. And those in chapter will recognize this is where it comes: a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. And he also has a vision of a temple, 3rd temple, I suppose, with a river running by and 7 steps. So if you look at the middle image of the 2nd degree tracing board, is that King Solomon's temple, or is it the envisaged by Ezekiel? But Ezekiel has he has a strange visions, but there we are. But now, of course, the Babylonian Empire is going to end. And it's told in this wonderful story of Belshazzar's feast, or as we know it, the writing on the wall, because Belshazzar was one of the rulers in Babylon. He was having a feast, and he ordered that all the holy vessels that they'd stolen from the temple at Jerusalem, the God's holy vessels, and he started to use them to toast false gods of iron and wood. And as he did it, a hand appears upon the wall, finger eyes, and the hand writes, "Mene, Mene, Tekel, up parson." And no one can translate this. What is this all about? So they have to call in the prophet Daniel, him of the lion's den, and they have to, and he translates it. So he says, "Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom. Tekel," like shekel, "thou art weighed in the balance and art found wanting," which is a famous phrase, of course, which Churchill used about our treatment of the chicks. "And up parson, God has divided your kingdom between your enemies." And that night, Belshazzar's dead, Babylon falls, of course, to the next great empire to come along, the Persians. Persia, look at the size of that. And the actual ruler of Persia is Cyrus the Great, who we can see there. And there I am in the British Museum, and behind me is the Cyrus cylinder. Now, this is important stuff, brethren and companions, because we can take our young brethren and companions to see these things. That Cyrus cylinder is touched by the great hands of this man, and it's the first declaration of human rights. It gives some credence to the story we read in the Bible, where Cyrus allows the Jews to go back to Jerusalem, build a temple and worship their own God. And so this is what we're seeing here in the British Museum, is the real proof. These are not legends. These are real stories, albeit told from a certain way. And so, again, this is the main feature. If you're not in chapter, companions, this is why you should join. This is the chapter tells us the story of the 2nd temple. So that on the site where King Solomon's temple has been burnt down, a temple is built during the reign. So now the king is not, Cyrus is dead, Darius is on the throne of Persia. And around 500 years before the birth of Christ, the 2nd temple is built by a man called Zerubbabel. Now, the temple itself is not destroyed. It is desecrated by the next people to invade the Holy Land, who are, of course, the Greeks. So the Greeks come and they beat the Persians. They try and Hellenize, Greekify the people there. And what happens is there's a Maccabean revolt. The Maccabees revolt, the Jews revolt, and they throw out the Greeks, and they have an independent nation for about 100 years until the coming of the next invaders, the Romans. Okay, now we come past the time of the New Testament, and here's a model in the middle of what the 2nd temple would have looked like at the time of Christ. Okay, extended by Herod. You know, if you're a Christian, Herod, of course, is portrayed as a sort of baddie, but it's extended by Herod. Here we can see on the left side, there's Jesus. And again, as a Jewish brother said to me, just remember he was in my religion before he was ever in yours. There he is turning out the money lenders. We could do with him back, couldn't we, with this Wonga.com and all these wicked people. So that's the temple where that would have happened. But of course, the temple's not going to last forever, because in 70 AD, There is a revolt against the Romans, and a general called Titus, who went on to be the emperor. There's a fight. He breaks into Jerusalem eventually after a siege, and the temple is destroyed. And there on the bottom left, you can see me in front of the Arch of Titus, which is in Rome. One of the friezes on the Arch of Titus that you can see in the center at the bottom, it shows the parade in Rome where they carried the menorah candlestick. You can see there. You can see the crossed bit like this. That they are the trumpets of Jericho. Behind that, what's the square box behind the trumpets is the table for the showbread, the gold top table where the priest would put the offering of bread. And you can see when the picture of the menorah on the right is actually from Jerusalem. And so when the Israeli government had that as their symbol, they copied the picture from the arch of Titus. But they think that all these items were stolen by the Goths or Vandals when they sacked Rome, and they may well be buried in the ground and the river swept over them. That's where they think they may be known. But what if we went back in time? What would we see? So remember at the very start I spoke about the rock where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the site of King Solomon's temple, etc. Well, there it is. There's that rock again, and it's under the Dome of the Rock, which is now an Islamic site of worship, where the Muslims believe that Muhammad went up to heaven on a white horse. There is me as well in front of the Wailing Wall, the remains of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. I actually went there. There was a very pious Jewish man there praying like this, and you put your little prayers in the and his mobile phone went off, and it had the Star Wars theme, so it rather ruined the moment. So if you do go, make sure you turn off your mobile phone. So in conclusion, brethren, I hope I've told you and showed you stories like the rock there. That's in Genesis, and it's there right now, and we can tell all our young brethren and companions about this. Some parts of the ritual are historically incorrect. You know, it wasn't brass, it was bronze. There wasn't any globes at the top of King Solomon's temple. But of course, Freemasonry is veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, which tends to mean you can make anything up you want, really. So there we are. Of the Bible itself, of a King James version of the Bible, there are, you can see nearly 1,200 chapters. And I found 400 references in 460 of them to a ritual. That's how many, you know, it's a good, 30% of the chapters. What I think is the most influential part of the Bible and a ritual is this. I think if you look at chapter 11 of St. Paul's letter to the Hebrews, he summarizes the Old Testament. And I think that our ritual writers, that's where they really went into, and that was a very pertinent part of the Bible when they designed our ritual. But you may have other ideas, but I do commend you have a look at that. As I say, it's a summary of the Old Testament. And so there we are. So I'm prepared to answer any questions. If you want to come and see these things, in the museums and like, please let me know when we get back to normal. Thank the Lord, hopefully we will. There we are though. So
Mike, thank you ever so much. There was a lot to take in there. I'm sure we're all going to have to watch it back again and listen back to it, but fascinating. We have got I've got some hands up here. Let's go to Jocelyn, please. Jocelyn. Hi, Jocelyn.
Good evening. Good evening. Excellent lecture. And I'd like to congratulate you. I just want to ask you, is there any special reason for not mentioning Enoch and Noah? Because both of them come in the first degree tracing board. And again, Noah comes specifically in another side degree, a progressive degree, which is the RAM. And that's one thing. And the second thing is, I understand the reason why David had a problem, God punished David, is because he did a census of the people, which again is mentioned in the, if I'm not mistaken, the first degree tracing book, where God punished David because of his doing a particular census.
That's it. Well, so the first point about Noah and Enoch, I could talk for hours on all this. You know, I've got to be selective, and you get 45 minutes. So, Justin, if you invite me to give a talk on the Royal Ark Mariner, I'll bespoke it. So, whatever degree, you know, if you said to me, come and give a talk on this in the Mark or the chapter, you get slightly different. So, it's just the reason I don't mention them is simply a time factor. And I absolutely, so you and I, a lot of these people on here will do a cheap and nasty version of the first degree tracing board, which says there is a third and last reason too far to go into, or something like that.
Yes,
but we actually know it. So I agree, they are mentioned, but it's quite unique to, I don't know, what ritual do you use?
I'm from the Grand Lodge of India, but we use a formation of the Immolation Lodge. But normally we go and do the full lecture whenever we want.
Which is unusual, but so forgive me. The only reason I didn't mention them is a time factor. But invite me back for Royal Ark Mariner, and you'll get the whole lot of them.
Thank you,
Jocelyn. Thank you as always, brother. Could we next go to Royston, please? Hi, Roy.
Unmute.
Yep, you're on.
Hello, I can hear you, Roy. I can hear you.
Hi there. Where does the timeline of the siege of Masada come in the biblical passage?
Into the Maccabees, the Maccabean revolt, so about 100 years before Christ.
Right. Okay.
So that's when that's sorry, forgive me, no, that's during the Roman times. So that's after the birth of Christ. It'd be afterwards.
Right.
It'd be around that 70 AD time when there was a revolt, when Jerusalem was destroyed.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's where that comes in.
Thanks, Roy. Could we next go to Ted? Hi, Ted. You're on mute, Ted. Ted, you're on mute.
Ted, we can't hear you.
Unmute. Unmuted.
Hello, Ted.
Thank you, dear sir, for this rather warp speed millennium. I'm sure the kids at Sunday school would have loved you for abbreviated program. What happened to the bromance between David and Jonathan, which is so important to some of our degrees?
Well, that's right. Yes, it's a very dubious. It's never completely described, is it? It's only hinted at in this bromance. I'm not sure how it came to an end, really, but maybe David was a bit like Mick Jagger. He liked boys and girls. I don't really know, but it doesn't really. There's no. Jonathan lives on, doesn't he, after Saul's dead, and David should really have him bumped off, but he doesn't, I suppose. So that's the relationship there. But I really don't know the end game. It never describes it. And of course, you're referring to the Order of the Secret Monitor.
Yes.
Which is a lovely degree, but I'm sorry, I don't really have an answer. I don't know. Maybe do you have an idea what happened to him?
I have no idea. That's why I asked.
I'm sorry. No, it's never made clear. Never made clear.
You're the font of knowledge.
Well, no. Well, I think it just fades away, to be honest. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problems.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you. And thank you, everybody else. If I don't think there's any more hands up, so there's no more questions there. If that is all, brethren, if anybody would like to ask a question, please let me know. We'll give it another minute or so.
It says on here, it says I've got some various questions coming up. Somebody says, are these books on the Letchworth site? Well, the Sacred Secrets one is, and that's on Amazon. If you want a signed copy, I can probably arrange that. I'll be more expensive than Amazon, but please give me the money rather than them.
Sorry to interrupt, Mike. We should announce that we need to give 5 books to brethren who joined this meeting. So if you could just, do your usual mug Q&A sessions or prize.
Oh, goodness, okay, you've told me right at the end. Let's have a look. So, brethren, have you just heard we've got 5 of Mike's books to give away? So let's do this then. the 5 quickest answers to let me know the name of the speaker that we had on last week. Go. Answers in the chat group, please.
And these 5 books will be signed, brethren. So there's Matthew.
Yeah, well done, Matthew. Oh my goodness, I can't believe some of you are getting it wrong. Do you not pay attention? I think you've got your 5 there. Mahir?
Oh, Paul, yes, of course.
Bit late now,
Yes,
Ted.
we got first 5. I will need your addresses, brethren. You can private message me on the Zoom chat group. Thank you.
If you could just read their names out so they know who they are, please, Mahir.
Yeah, 1 second. Oh, my screen froze.
Right, I'll tell you what I'll do. Matthew Burt.
My screen froze, yeah. Can you just read
Matthew
them out,
Burt.
Amit?
Well done. Peter Hartland, I'll accept that answer from you. If you could just send Mahir your address, please. Then we've got Quado Ade and Mark Nixon. Well done to you both. And the final one, we've got Praveen Anumula. Praveen, it'll be on its way to you. I hope it doesn't break. It's a book, so it shouldn't do.
You forgot Quadwell.
That's right. I think I've called out the first 5. Brilliant. Mahir, you've got those names written down?
Where might we purchase? Where would we send a?
Yes, I have, but I need to get addresses privately from the brethren.
Okay.
They heard themselves, so
Yeah.
I'm waiting for address to be written. I've only got a reply from Matthew Burt. So once the meeting closed, brethren, I'm not going to be able to get your addresses. Please do type immediately.
Mike, could you just answer Ted's question, please?
What's that? Sorry, apologies.
He's in the States.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon, did you say, the book?
It is on Amazon, yeah. If you look on Amazon, it's on there, yeah.
Ted,
Wouldn't you like it? Wouldn't you like it directly to you? Or?
With me personally, you can, if you email me, I mean, it's got all my details. You can, and I can arrange for it to be sent out if you like a signed copy.
Through PayPal or something like that.
Something like that. Well, however works you, Ted. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
Ted, I'll ping you an email and copy Mike in later on.
Thank you very much. So
can I just clarify something? I'll just confirm this, that Jonathan was actually killed in battle. That's where he was killed. He killed fighting.
Yes, yes.
So there you go. So apologies.
Dead is dead.
But it's great to see you all. And if you want another talk on goody and baddie Freemasons, then please, I'm doing that tonight. I'm talking tonight at 8 p.m. to Lodge on Freemasons who are like scoundrels and scandalous around the West End of London. So Oscar Wilde and the like. So there you go.
Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper. You can have one in him as well. I've traced 40 Masons involved in that case.
Well, I've traced all the pubs he used to go to. Chris, Mike, thank you so much again. Brethren, before you all disappear and go off for your dinners or teas, next week we've got the Grand High Priest Chris Maiden from the Knights Templar Priests on with us to give us an excellent talk next week. Same time, 6 p.m. Please log on, obviously, before that. But we've got a fair few weeks of some wonderful, wonderful lectures and talks coming up. So please do put it in your diary, 6 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Amit. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye. Thanks, Mike. Thanks,
Good
Mike.
night. Thank you. Peace to all.
Thank you very much.
God bless,
Mike,
brethren.
you did a great job.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you ever so much.
Bye, everybody.
Good week.
See you, Giovanni.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Mike, I will also need
Thank
your
you, Bob.
address by email. You can reply to one of my emails.
Yes.
I will send you a Freemasons Without Borders cups, one of the mugs that we've been.
No, thank you so
give
much.
away
And I'll
to all our speakers.
Amit, could you send me when you get it up on YouTube? Can you just give me the link, please?
I certainly will, yeah. Is Mark Nixon still on? Mark, are you still on? Oh, do you want to unmute yourself, Mark?
Yes, I am, mate.
Yeah, you're becoming a serial winner, Mark. We have got your address. Mark won a mug, I think last week, a couple of weeks ago. We're waiting for a new delivery to arrive, Mark. They should be with us on Friday.
On Friday, yeah.
No worries, bud. I've been away doing a charity walk for MCF, so I was worried that I'd missed it. That's all.
I'm going to have to omit you from now on for the question.
No, I'll stop. Honest.
No, but they should be with us on Friday. I think there's just delays in production.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks very much indeed. Super talk. Lots to think about. And I've been watching oh crumbs, what's it called? The police series on television, Line of Duty.
Right, okay.
What do you think of that?
Well, these things are all a bit fiction, aren't they? You know, I'm sure these things are. Well, they've always been ramped up. There's always been corrupt officers, and if you read the whole reason the CID was formed was because of a corruption scandal in 1877, which involved Masons who were baddies and Masons who were goodies. But the trial involved several Freemasons in either side, but. There's always been corruption, but so I enjoyed the being in the police, but and the TV is good, isn't it? Hopefully, I'm being a technical advisor on a TV show about the human super recognizers, so you might see me on that. But I was on Quest Red on Saturday. There's a about Grenfell Tower fraudsters. That's if you want to see my police work, that's on that.
When were you in Germany, and when were you in Hong Kong?
Right, so I was in Hong Kong in '84, and I was in Germany '85, '87, in Münster and Bielefeld.
Right, I was in Hong Kong 67 to 71, and then was sent down to Brunei to set up a school there, and then I was in Germany 73 to 86, Hildesheim 82 to 86. So
right, okay. Yeah,
I don't think our paths would have crossed, but
I've been back there when all those sex attacks happened in Cologne in the New Year's Eve 3 or 4 years ago. I was sent there as an advisor, but Norbert's on.